I'm Melissa Caen, KPIX political analyst. I am here with John Dickerson. He's the host of Face the Nation and the author of a new book called Whistle Stop, a series of stories about presidential campaigns in history. And again, we're so thrilled to have you here, Mr. Dickerson. Let's jump right in, though, with current events. Donald Trump made comments about the Second Amendment and Hillary Clinton. Some say implied that persons who own guns should take aim at Hillary Clinton. He says, forget it, the media just invented this. As a journalist, how do you cover an issue like this where the allegation is that the media invented it?
Well, he's going to say the media invented anything that doesn't benefit him. So that's one challenge to this. On the other hand, here was something he said. It wasn't clear. A lot of people thought he was absolutely making a kind of veiled threat. Part of it is the unique way Donald Trump speaks. Part of it is the way people look at this issue. In other words, if you're a gun control person, you think of guns differently than if you're a believer in the Second Amendment or gun rights. And so if you're a gun rights person, you heard him say that you might have just moved on. So part of the assessment is where you kind of sit before the event ever happened. And also, part of it is the Clinton campaign jumped on this immediately. They're turning it into an issue. So it's very murky. And what he said was open to interpretation. So that made it a little bit more difficult, too. And I should say one final thing is that this is coming after a series of missteps on his part. So it kind of plays already into the view that a lot of people have that he's just kind of a volatile candidate.
Does he have an obligation to say things that can't be misconstrued in this way?
Well, it's part of his genius, and part of what people like about him is that he speaks his mind. And then he speaks in a kind of rough and not very politically polished way. On the other hand, when you're talking about, when you're brushing up against the idea that people might take up action to stop a sitting president or stop Supreme Court justices from doing something, you need to be careful when you have that kind of megaphone. And when the campaign that we're in right now has gotten, and he has contributed to, in some measure, the heat of this campaign, where, we've seen the violence at the rallies, we've seen a lot of back and forth. And from the right, they look at what is said about Donald Trump, and they think, look at the kind of vitriol being sent his way, and they would say from the right that that liberals are making him into a boogeyman and therefore putting a target on him. So in this environment, everything you have to say has to be watched carefully. But the whole point of Donald Trump's campaign is he doesn't watch what he says, and that's why people like him.
Well, from a journalism perspective, how do you cover a candidate or candidates, frankly, when there's so much confirmation bias? There's so much disregard for facts, it seems, on among people on both sides. As a journalist, how do you view sort of your role? How do you navigate that?
I think the challenge is, and both candidates have challenges with the truth, but they have different kinds of challenges. Donald Trump has been at odds with the facts more times than any other major candidate we've had. The fact checkers have said that across different fact-checking organizations. Just in the sheer aggregate number of things that he's misstated or gotten wrong. That's his case. And then Hillary Clinton has her own case, which is that she says that things that didn't turn out to be true about her email server, or what she said about trade is not quite the straight story. And those are things that she's talking about when she had actually the job of being Secretary of State. So one is just rhetoric on the campaign trail. One are things that are said about and actions that took place in office. So what you do is, at least the way I see it anyway, is you present those two choices to people and say, if the trustworthiness of your president is important, here are the two liabilities of the two candidates, and figure out which of the two. It is a choice. It doesn't mean they're equivalent on all issues, but you're making a choice between two candidates. And here on the trust question are the liabilities for both, and then it's up to people who are voting to make a choice about whether the liabilities are greater for one or greater for the other.
Do you think that Hillary Clinton is lucky? Do you think that she is sort of secretly thrilled that she's running against Donald Trump as opposed to a different Republican candidate?
Certainly you would, when you talk to people involved in her campaign, and when you talk to Democratic strategists, they say, given the difficult hand that she has to play, and that is that people don't think she's trustworthy, her unfavorable numbers are high, She's been in the public eye for a long time, which makes her a difficult candidate in an election where people are seeking change. So all of those liabilities make her lucky in the opponent she got with Donald Trump. And there are a lot of Democrats, and as I say, people in her campaign who will say that. They might not say it out loud, but they will say that, and Republicans say it a lot. And they say, geez, we would be doing much better if Marco Rubio were the nominee, or Scott Walker, or someone other than Donald Trump, who has a series of liabilities that he's been stuck in over the last couple of weeks.
And it seems like every day there's maybe every hour there's a new issue to cover. Just from a manpower standpoint, how do you cover it there over at CBS? It seems like Major Garrett must be just exhausted.
Yeah, I know. We want to give Major Garrett blood transfusions. He's the hardest. He and Nancy Cordes are out there, getting no sleep. A lot of planes, a lot of long hours. They're on the case, and then we have Steve Shigaris, who is the senior political producer, who is watching everything. He also has a fantastic group of embeds who work for him and with him, and Jimmy McGlinchey as well, and they have covered this campaign wonderfully. I mean, there is not a thing that happens that isn't covered by that group. It's a wonder to see, and because so much is happening, you see it a lot. The email inbox is bulging with new developments every hour.
I bet lots of overtime over there. Now, your book is a historical take on a number of different presidential elections, and recently we've seen some defections from Donald Trump, not from the party, but just persons sort of distancing themselves. There's the letter of 50 national security personnel sort of decrying his potential administration. Historically, have you seen anything like this before? When Goldwater or Wallace was running, did you see similar kinds of people moving to distance themselves?
In 64, when Goldwater was the Republican nominee, there was definitely distancing. The primary was a little bit different then. By the time when they got to the Cow Palace in 1964 for the Republican convention, Goldwater was ahead, but Scranton was challenging him, and there was no locked-up nominee the way there is today. But Goldwater was well ahead. And so there was still this Stop Goldwater movement. 19 Republican governors were participating in it. That's a lot. But once Goldwater won the right, once he got the delegates and went over the top, Scranton, who was sort of, let's call him the Ted Cruz of his day, which is to say not politically, but he was the major opponent to Goldwater, the way Cruz was to Trump. Mm-hmm. Scranton came out and endorsed him, unlike what Ted Cruz did this year. And then there were a few, Jacob Javits and Ken Keating, both of them in New York, kind of moderate Republicans, back when you could be called such a thing and still exist. So the analog today would be Susan Collins, who has said she's not going to vote for Donald Trump. But the 50 Republican national security experts, that is new in terms of just the sheer number and coming out against a candidate. And so I think Donald Trump is probably getting more defections, and probably will at the end, than Goldwater had.
Now, I saw you on CBS the other day say that Donald Trump reminded you of George Wallace. That seemed very similar. What about Hillary Clinton, who historically, again, sort of gender aside, what is her campaign, or who does her campaign resemble historically?
Well, in a sense, it's hard to find a perfect analog. I mean, I think in some way you could say that George Herbert Walker Bush was a candidate who was an establishment candidate, the way she is, and had served under another president. He was the vice president, of course, but she's Secretary of State. And he had worked his way up in the system. Now, she did as well. I mean, having been Senator and Secretary of State, obviously First Lady is not an elected office, but she's sort of been in the limelight as much, or in the political process as much, as George Herbert Walker Bush was, and also has that connection to the previous administration. And so the Reagan-Bush team, 3 terms consecutively under a Republican, this would be the first time you'd have 3 consecutive terms under a Democrat. It doesn't happen that often. So that is probably the closest one. There was in the book, there's a scandal over personal letters in 1884 with a guy named James G. Blaine, which makes you think of the email scandal too. I won't go into details, but anyway, that one, yeah, that's right, exactly. Get the book, and they'll get the whole story.
Now, you also write about McGovern, that he was trying to be the horse and the jockey at the same time. That was actually a quote that from someone else, and that is to sort of be the candidate and be the head of the campaign. Does Trump suffer from that issue?
Yeah, that's a great point. He does. So McGovern this is when he picked Tom Eagleton to be his number 2 in a very hectic vice presidential selection process. After 18 days, Eagleton had to leave the ticket because of undisclosed or previously undisclosed mental health treatments that he'd undergone. And the part of the issue here was both Eagleton hadn't been straight with the campaign, but also McGovern kind of thought, well, I figured it out. I'm going to pick Eagleton. He kind of didn't go through the process. He sort of trusted his own instincts above all of his advisors. Barack Obama used to say, you know, if I want to be, I could be the best speechwriter, the best scheduler, the best campaign manager. The candidate feeling like they could do every job better than everyone else if they just had the time to do it. That's different than candidates like George W. Bush, who was very specific about delegation and thought, you know, this is your job. I don't do that job. I don't want to know what that job is, but you must do that job well. I'm talking specifically in the campaign context when he was running in 2000. So I think with Donald Trump, that's definitely the case. He's running the show. To be a campaign manager is to be kind of there hoping to influence him, but in the end, he's going to do what he's going to do.
And finally, in the book is a series of sort of pivotal moments. You talk about the Howard Dean moment and how that influenced the election, or the Mike Dukakis, you know, in a helmet moment, and how that influenced the election. It is only August, of course, but if you had to pick a moment so far in this election that you think either is pivotal or will be regarded as pivotal, what would you say up to now?
Well, one of the things that in looking at those 2 examples you mentioned and a few others in the book, there's this question of whether it's a turning point moment or whether it's a symbolic moment that tells us that really just comes at the end of a thing that's turning or of a campaign that's turning for other underlying reasons. And we just fix on the moment because that's just kind of the flashpoint, but that there are lots of underlying. So with that in mind, the back and forth that Donald Trump got into with the Caen family, Captain Caen's parents who spoke at the Democratic Convention, and then the fallout after that, it was familiar in a way when Donald Trump talked about a ban of new Muslim immigration. Paul Ryan spoke out against him. Mitch McConnell spoke out against him. Even Dick Cheney spoke out against him. So he had previous instances where Republicans had spoken out against him. But when it happened again with respect to the Caen family, it was further down the line. He was now the nominee of the Republican Party, fewer days until the election. So it was a kind of both a culmination of worries Republicans had about him and also a particular and unique instance, which is getting in a fight with a Gold Star family. So that might be a turning point because this question of temperament has always been the one the Trump campaign has said would be crucial. If people think he has the temperament to handle the job, the Trump advisors will say, then he'll win because it's a change election and people just have to feel secure that they can hand him the presidency. Well, the fight with the Caen family got to this question of temperament. And so it reanimated a problem that was there already, but put a special focus on it. So for the moment, I would say that might be a turning point. But again, it has themes and threads that go throughout the last several months of the campaign.
Well, we'll have to wait for volume 2.
And 3 and 4,
and
frankly.
3 and 4,
yeah.
I can't wait. The book is called Whistle Stop. It is available right now. John Dickerson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.